As we know, Thanasi, WrestleMania is WWE's biggest and most historic event. But as all fans know, it certainly varies in quality from year to year. Welcome back to the second part of our series, Ranking WrestleManias. Last week, we ranked WrestleManias 31 to 39, and I encourage everyone to go back and watch the video if you haven't already. In this video, we're going to be reviewing WrestleManias 21 to 30, a decade of showcases of the Immortals that bore witness to some absolute classic matches that have truly stood the test of time, and other matches that you completely forgot even happened. As with any ranking, we have to assign some categories, and so we have at the top all time, describing WrestleManias that will really stand out for years to come. We have below that intestinal fortitude, very solid shows, very nice. Below that, we have so much promise, these manias that really could have been something special but just didn't quite live up to the hype. And finally, we have let's forget about this. The category for those manias that we truly just want to bury in the backs of our minds and never have to think about again. That's it. I only have one question left, and that is, are you ready?
I'm damn ready. Let's sink our teeth into it.
All right, well, to start off with, we have WrestleMania 21, and this one was quite an historic one, I would say, in the sense that this really crowned the two new faces of the company going into the next 3, 4 years, 5 years at the of the time in which John Cena and Batista both beat JBL and Triple H respectively for the world championships of WWE. This one also featured a classic Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels WrestleMania match. It saw Randy Orton contest The Undertaker for the streak. And it also saw the debut of the Money in the Bank ladder match, in which Edge came out victorious. So there's plenty that goes on on this show, but what do you think of it?
Look, there's a lot on this show that makes it fantastic, right? Every match that you've mentioned, 100% is relevant. And I'm going to add on another one to it. This was the WrestleMania where we saw for the last time Eddie Guerrero compete at a WrestleMania, and he was against his dear friend Rey Mysterio, who at that time was also not only his tag team partner, but they were the WWE tag team champions at the time going up against each other. So overall, this match was, or this pay-per-view rather, was really a watershed time because it was showcasing innovation with the Money in the Bank, but also the way forward with the two victories of Cena and Batista. Now, that being said, I wouldn't say that those were five-star classics. The five-star classic 100% was Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle. And I think I'm going to be looking at that one as the anchor point to determine where we want to structure this one. But I'm keen to get your thoughts on which of our four tiers you think that you want to put this in.
I'm hovering between the top two because I think it is a very good show and it also has historic relevance in the sense that it is John Cena and Batista's first ever world championship victories. And also, it culminated a 3 year saga of Batista and Triple H, the implosion of Evolution as well. So we can't discredit that. Plus, Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, it's classic, but if we're being honest, Michaels has so many classics coming up that it's kind of almost a wash with each mania that we consider. But yeah, I'm hovering between the top two. I think I'd probably put this top of intestinal fortitude,
Okay,
at least for now.
let's put it there as a starting point. I was actually going to say let's put it in all time,
Okay.
mostly because I'm anticipating where the other ones are going to go. But I'm happy to put it in intestinal fortitude for the time being.
I'm happy to revisit it, but let's get into the next Mania conversation for now, and that is WrestleMania 22. Now, this one, again, Shawn Michaels had probably match of the night, but this time, instead of doing it with a wrestling machine and Kurt Angle, he did it with Vince McMahon. I I am still to this day so confused by how this was possible. And the only explanation is really it's the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. But in addition to that, Edge and Mick Foley had what is probably the classic or quintessential hardcore match in a non-hardcore promotion. Mickey James beat Trish Stratus and infamously did a certain gesture.
Oh, let's not bring that up. Come on.
And RVD won the Money in the Bank ladder match. What I felt was a very good Money in the Bank ladder match as well. And I loved the spot of him actually jumping off the ladder after retrieving the briefcase.
He was so enthusiastic.
Yeah. What do you think of this? Because I think this is a Mania that I do remember fairly well as well. And I was only
I
5 years old at the time when it came out, so it's not something I watched in the moment.
Well, those four matches that you said, I think certainly are the standout matches. However, we've also got two world championship matches, and the Cena versus Triple H one, I'm not as big of a fan of it, to be quite honest.
I
But
agree with you.
with the World Heavyweight Championship triple threat, they were victims of the fact that everything else on the show was going too long. So they had a shorter match than they should have. But the fact that we had Rey Mysterio becoming the heavyweight champion of the world was just such a beautiful moment. It was exactly what we wanted to see. It was a tribute to Eddie Guerrero as well, but a very, very well-deserved moment for Rey Mysterio. And that, I don't know, makes like a really strong argument for just a really enjoyable pay-per-view all round.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this one, it reminds me in a lot of ways of WrestleMania 21 in terms of that actual enjoyment factor. Where are you tempted to place this?
Look, I would be similar. I'm similarly minded to think of top two. And I think preliminarily, my thought was actually to put this in the top tier at all time. But I'm not sure what your thoughts were.
I think I'm tempted to put it in all time.
Okay.
We'll do the same as with 21 and we'll provisionally put it there and we'll
Hmm.
revisit at the end. Now moving on to WrestleMania 23. Now, this show saw The Undertaker beat Batista in what was probably the beginning of a long stretch of main event worthy streak matches for The Undertaker. It also saw Bobby Lashley beat Umaga to make Vince McMahon shave his head. This was the Battle of the Billionaires, obviously, with Donald Trump involved. The main event saw John Cena beat Shawn Michaels, and although he beat one of our favorites, we can't deny that Shawn Michaels really did carry him to what is arguably his best ever Mania match. What do you think of this show overall?
So I guess what I'm thinking about this one, we also had, like like we've been recording all these Money in the Bank matches. This was the one where Mr. Kennedy got his long-awaited victory. He never actually got to cash in, but nevertheless, it was a good Money in the Bank match. Who can forget that spot where Matt Hardy, with his hatred for Edge, lays his body, drapes his body onto a ladder that is perched between the ring apron and the barricade, and then yells up, instructs his brother to deliver an enormous leg drop off the top of yet another ladder to try to end the career of his mortal enemy Edge. Overall, as far as I'm thinking about this pay-per-view, the Taker and Batista match and the world title match, the WWE Championship match, those are far and wide the two big standouts, right? And it's
Agree.
excellent to see that in contrast to 21 and 22, that the world title matches were the standout. And obviously, you look at the caliber that you've got there: Taker, Batista, Shawn Michaels. It really is just a fantastic thing to see. And of course, hair versus hair didn't really do all that much for me. Just um, trying to push Bobby Lashley. Okay, some of the other matches on the card didn't really don't really make me feel all that much. So I think it's based on those the three more important matches, two of which were standouts, on which we're going to make our assessment. Where are you thinking?
See, my problem is this. I don't remember WrestleMania 23 that well. And I don't mean that I haven't seen it before. It's just that I feel like it doesn't stick out to me as vividly as other WrestleManias, partly because it came in that period in which I wasn't conscious enough of them in the moment. So I had to revisit it. And I'm kind of relying on you to tell me overall how the show was, because sometimes it's hard to look at matches and get a gauge of how it felt as an actual 3 hour experience. I'd say I don't think this is an all-time event.
Certainly not.
I think some disagree with us on that, but I personally don't think it fits there. I'd say it's either at the top of so much promise, or it's in that mix of intestinal fortitude, and I defer to you.
I'm thinking probably the top or the upper end of our third tier, which is so much potential, so much promise. Because there was a lot of promise. Yes, we got two fantastic world title matches, but you can fill out the rest of the card with a lot of good matches as well. And with, you know, trying to shove Kane versus Khali in there or Bobby Lashley versus Umaga, it was just a bunch of meat instead of wrestling. Benoit versus MVP could have been a little bit more of a classic as well if they gave it the attention it deserved. So that's where I'm thinking top of number three.
All right, well, we'll agree on that then, and then we'll moving on to what is the first WrestleMania that I actually remember in the moment, and that is WrestleMania 24. Firstly, I just want to say great Money in the Bank match. And also, I just wanted to quickly remark, I always, for some reason, it must have been a Mandela effect or something. I always assumed Money in the Bank matches opened Mania. And I'm looking back at these, and they haven't opened once. There's always been like a filler match beforehand. And I find that interesting because it almost, to me, felt like Money in the Bank started it. And it's like whatever match was beforehand was just it was like a dark match that just happened to go live.
Yeah. No, I get that vibe. And I actually have a very similar view to you as well. My first instinct is that the opening contest of Money in the, well, it was Money in the Bank at WrestleMania
Yeah.
24 in 2008, but it was actually the Belfast brawl between JBL and Finlay for
Yeah.
some reason.
For some reason. But going back to the Money in the Bank, this was CM Punk's first victory, and I really love the match. It's a lot of fun, and I especially love the finish where Chris Jericho's legs are entangled in the rugs of the ladder, and he's sort of trying to lift himself back into a position to get it, but CM Punk is able to clinch it. And even at this time, I was a big fan of CM Punk. Thanasi, I know you were a big fan of CM Punk. So to see someone like him really get that victory, it felt like it's a perfect Money in the Bank type of winner.
Well,
You
it
know?
was. He was just really, really cool. And
Yeah.
well, the reason I think we've got the very conscious memories of this is because this was the first WrestleMania I think that we purchased on DVD. So we
Yep.
had this was I think what I'm pretty sure this was our first WrestleMania that we had in the family DVD library. And there were some other nice spots here in the Money in the Bank match as well. Shelton Benjamin with the sunset flip powerbomb off the top of the ladder, Carlito with a backstabber off the top of the ladder, John Morrison with the moonsault onto the outside, holding a small ladder so he could hurt his
Yes.
opponents even more. But let's not limit it just to the Money in the Bank
Oh,
match
absolutely
because
not. I was going to say that as well because we've got the classic Shawn Michaels Ric Flair match, which in
oh,
my money, Ric Flair should have allowed that to be his true retirement match. In my eyes, it still is, but the fact that he wrestled again 14 years later has really taken an edge, taken a bit of a bit of interest off of that last match. But Undertaker versus Edge in the main event, brilliant. It also birthed the meme of Charles Robinson running down the ramp,
oh,
which is excellent. I think that there's even something like Floyd Mayweather Big Show is fun, not perfect. Randy Orton beating Triple H and John Cena had a great closing moment, closing finish, which stands out. Kane beat Chavo Guerrero in 11 seconds. Uh, and there's just, I feel like there's a lot of fun to this show.
there is a hell of a lot of fun here. The reflection that I'm having in hindsight, so not in the moment, but certainly in
Yeah,
hindsight, is that I think this show has three standout matches,
hmm,
being the World Heavyweight Championship match, the career-threatening match, and the Money in the Bank match.
agreed.
Whereas some of the other ones that we mentioned for 21 and 22, they have a few more than just three, right? They've got maybe four. So that is where I'm framing my thinking for where I'm going to place 24 in the tiers. So I was actually thinking that tier two intestinal fortitude was a really appropriate place to put this based on that logic. What do you think of that? Do you have any other views?
No, I completely agree. I think this is a really solid show and they've done well for it. But yeah, I think that category fits perfectly. All right, well, on to the next Mania, WrestleMania 25. This one saw CM Punk win Money in the Bank again
Mm,
in an enjoyable match, but I'd say the first feels more memorable to me.
100%.
This saw the Hardys go to war against each other, which I think is a really fun match, really enjoyable. Chris Jericho had a handicap match against Jimmy Snuka, Ricky Steamboat, and Roddy Piper. And to be honest, he and Steamboat actually did well together,
Mm,
like surprisingly well. Obviously, the main event saw Triple H beat Randy Orton at a time in which, to be honest, Randy should have won. It should have
of
been
course.
the defining moment of his heeldom at this time. John Cena beat Big Show and Edge in a match. We can't forget the spot where Cena has both the Big Show and Edge on with a fireman's carry at the same time. That is unbelievable strength. But it wasn't the main event. It wasn't even meant to go longer than I think 12 minutes or 15 minutes. But the true classic of this Mania is The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels. Then I see, what are your thoughts on this
Well, this is
WrestleMania?
arguably the greatest. You know what? It's not even arguably. Like it's largely considered the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. And I mean, how can you argue with it, right? Like the standouts that we've been talking about between 21, 22, 23, 24, and now we're getting to 25, where we're going to get them together, Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. So I guess the question really here is how much does this match carry the entire show? Because if you look at the Money in the Bank match, a little bit underwhelming. The main event was an incorrect booking decision, in my opinion. The World Heavyweight Championship match, it was another Cena coronation, something we had seen before a couple times going into this. And even the Hardy Boys match, I liked it. I enjoyed it. So personally, subjectively, it was great. I think people did consider that to be a little bit underwhelming as well. They went harder at Backlash in the follow-up. So how much kudos do we want to place on the Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels match? I'm initially thinking as a show in total, because this one was the exception, but as a show in total, I'm thinking that it was a so much promise kind of thing. Probably at the top of that. What do you think?
See, I think you're right. It's I I I'm hard pressed to say any other Mania match that is better than Undertaker Shawn Michaels, and that includes their follow up the year after. But as a show, I don't necessarily go back and watch it in entirety. Whereas there are other Manias on this list that I will want to go back and watch the full thing, even
Hmm.
through the ebbs and flows that it has. So I think So Much Promise is a fitting placement for it, and I'm happy to make that official.
Excellent.
All right, well, on to the next Mania, and that is WrestleMania 26. This one was main evented by Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and was very appropriately so, with it being a streak versus career match.
Yep.
I think again they pulled it off. They did something fantastic, and I think that even though it was hard pressed to live up to their own delivery in the previous year, they still did something really nice with it. And to me, this is probably the most emotional I've ever been during a wrestling show, because I was only 9 at the time, and to see one of my favorites in Shawn Michaels retire in a time where I didn't understand this thing hurts like hell. He's been around for so long, he probably wants to just call it quits. All I understood is my hero was beaten and now he has to retire, just like he retired his own hero 2 years prior. And I just found that really sad at the time. Upon reflection, it was perfect. And that's the way I feel about this, is that this is another Mania in which the whole show isn't necessarily as great, although there are some good moments. Like I still think Jericho Edge is a very good match for the World Heavyweight Championship. I think Rey Mysterio and Punk. Unfortunately, this wasn't the defining match of their really interesting rivalry that they had at this time. And also, it's a shit Money in the Bank ladder match, but I remember it fondly for the sake that it was the last Mania Money in the Bank ladder match. I'm not saying that's going to bring it higher, but I just think that's something worth mentioning. All in all, this is still a show that I really like to go back and watch. How do you feel about it?
So I remember this one very fondly because we watched it day of. This was the one where I was in year six and we had all the guys get together at one of my good mates' house. And we watched this right after school. It was recorded. And like you say, Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels, that was a gut-wrenching moment to see him go with that super strong, intense eyes tombstone that was hit, I think, for the third time in that match by The Undertaker to retire Shawn Michaels. And I'm looking at the rest of the card, and I think that Mysterio versus Punk probably is the second best match on this card. I remember being a little bit underwhelmed when it was opened by R-Truth and John Morrison taking on Show Miz at the time. I thought that was a bit of a letdown. And I'm looking at some of the other matches on this card. Cena Batista didn't do anything for me. Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon, good lord.
That was, I think, even Bret Hart will admit it's up there as one of his worst. And it's not his
Edge,
fault. He's not. He wasn't
oh
ring.
yeah.
He's not ring shaped for it.
Edge versus Chris Jericho had a lot of hype going into it, and they swerved us. Like
Yeah,
it was being made very clear that Edge should have won this one because people were really hot for him, and they just swerved us with a dirty finish. Triple H versus Sheamus, the Legacy Triple Threat, some okay, but I wouldn't call these absolute marquee or all-time
no,
matches.
not at all.
So my inclination is I'm looking at potentially putting this towards the middle or the bottom of our third tier, which is so much promise because there was just a lot left wanting out of this aside from the main event.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where we should put it. We'll pair it up with WrestleMania 25. And
Yeah.
yeah. All right, on to WrestleMania 27. Now, this one has quite a reputation, Thanasis,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to do anything to try and argue in its favor. This is the show in which The Rock returned as a host, and it began what was a three Mania saga with John Cena. This one was notably Edge's last wrestling match before he returned at Royal Rumble 2020 because of his neck injury, where he beat Alberto Del Rio. It saw The Miz main event, WrestleMania against John Cena. I think it's up there as one of the worst Mania main events ever, which might be controversial, but
Awful booking for it as well.
woeful. But you know, The Miz main evented, and that's all he cares about. So kudos to him. I think this WrestleMania is purely salvage. Before I even get to it, Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler had a match, and it went for like 15 minutes.
Oh God, what a segment.
Oh my God. But the one saving grace of this card is The Undertaker versus Triple H in a no holds barred match. And I think they did an excellent job in continuing the legacy of the Michaels matches, but doing it in a completely different way. It didn't feel like they were repeating what they did before. It felt like they're continuing the gravitas of those matches, but they added the violence into it. They added that aspect. And I think this really is the only match that is great on this card. Is that fair
I
to say?
I I would disagree, and you might have forgotten about this, but tell me your views. Randy Orton versus CM Punk. I think that was a good match. There
Uh,
was a nice story into it.
Good is fine. And I do agree with you. And it has a great finish as well, with him going for the
Oh, an
diving
excellent
clothesline
finish.
into the
Yeah.
RKO. But I'm saying great match because Undertaker Triple H is something that really, like when you say WrestleMania 27, that sticks out.
It is
I
true.
don't think people remember Randy Orton, CM Punk the same way they do Undertaker Triple H.
Oh, well, you certainly can't. I mean, you look at that finish, and really the story coming out of that is it's demonstrating after all these years how much the streak means to The Undertaker. That everyone says, I'm going to go out and leave it all in the ring. But when they do that, they're still able to walk out on their own two legs.
Yeah.
Undertaker left absolutely everything out in that ring that he couldn't come out by himself. Triple H could not do the same. Um, but yes, all in all, okay, I'll agree one great match, but I think we can also say another good match as well on this card. And I'm not sure how much that changes things, if it's promise or if it's actually quite bad. But I'm inclined to say that it's got a lot of promise because it did.
I think this is the definition of let's forget about this. I think the way,
Oh,
well, think about it. Like the way it closes is terrible. The Michael Cole, Jerry Lawler stuff is embarrassing. There are a lot of nothing matches in addition to some of the good ones. And I just feel like this really it began a stretch of Mania main events that the casuals would have loved, but the hardcore wrestling fans hated with a passion, a burning passion. And I just think that for the precedent that is set, I can't let this go any higher than let's forget about this.
it's a harsh call, but I'm gonna have to concede.
All right. Well, let's move on to WrestleMania 28. And this one obviously had the end of an era Hell in a Cell match between Undertaker and Triple H. They, in my opinion, managed to top what they did the year prior.
They
And I
did.
and I think this really does stand out as probably the second best Undertaker WrestleMania match for me.
The second best.
Certainly with the element as well, Shawn Michaels being special guest referee, had the excellent spot, but with the super kick and pedigree. For me, that is literally the only time I ever believed the streak was over, and that is still it still sends chills down my spine, that kick out. But for that great moment, we have things like Sheamus losing to Daniel Bryan. Sorry, Sheamus beating Daniel Bryan in 18 seconds, which at the time didn't bother me as much because I wasn't a Daniel Bryan fanatic, but I did feel like
Now,
now looking back, it's a bit,
uh,
that's not cool. Uh, and then we also have things like Team Johnny Laurinaitis versus Team Teddy Long, which is just, oh,
but what about see? I'm trying to just divert from this. But what about CM Punk versus Chris Jericho?
a
That
great,
one, that was a good match.
yeah,
It was their Extreme Rules Backlash match was a lot more enjoyable. It was in Chicago.
yeah.
But I think CM Punk walking into WrestleMania as world champion for the only ever time, I believe, at least thus far, will still hold a very special place in my heart,
I think it stood out for its actual wrestling expertise on a show
Mm.
that probably needed it.
Especially
Especially
given
with,
the main event.
I was going to say, with the main event being The Rock and John Cena. I remember though, I'll give it this. I still look back on that match somewhat fondly for one reason, and that is I really thought John Cena was going to win, and this was like in the peak hatred I had of John Cena. So seeing The Rock actually beat him, it was just a really nice surprise. And I felt like because it wasn't for the championship, I didn't mind it as much, which is why this Mania for me, it fit more along the lines of a so much promise or an intestinal fortitude and not a bottom of the barrel. Let's forget about this.
I agree. I agree on that it's not at the bottom of the barrel. I would say so much promise.
Yeah, I think that's
I would
fair.
say so much promise for this one. Because I remember at least with the redeeming feature of The Rock at this point is that he was portraying himself as the anti-Cena. So
Mm.
all of the smart mark fans, we were keen to see The Rock win. Whereas now, more than 10 years later, it's not quite the same. The Rock is has returned, I suppose, to the status of a Cena, where he's stealing the spotlight or inappropriately receiving the spotlight. But certainly, tier number three, so much promise is where we want to go.
On to the next Mania, the WrestleMania 29. Again, running theme. Undertaker really sold this Mania with his fantastic match with CM Punk. The true main event of this Mania for me. And then that was uh, in the middle of other matches like Alberto Del Rio versus Jack Swagger. Couldn't tell you a single thing that happens in that match, to be perfectly honest. Fun, damn, go. Beat Chris Jericho, very surprisingly. Team Hell No beat Big E and Dolph Ziggler. The reason I'm saying this, and this also had the Shield's Mania debut against Big Show, Randy Orton, and Sheamus. The reason I'm saying this is because when you consider those factors, and then you had two matches of Triple H versus Brock Lesnar that by no means is either of theirs best work, and then you have John Cena beat The Rock for the WWE Championship. To me, it really says WrestleMania 29 is the definition of a one match card.
Yes, 100%. I fully agree with you. If it didn't have the saving grace of CM Punk versus Undertaker, it'd be like, well, what the hell are we doing here? Is this really your biggest event of the year? And it was unfortunately the last Mania I watched before I took a couple years break from wrestling. So it definitely ended for me on a bit of a low note. And especially because CM Punk should have been in the main event at this year's WrestleMania. The fact that he had that banger, that five-star classic with The Undertaker, was him proving to the world how good he is and that he is indeed the best in the world.
In that case, will you support my push to put this in? Let's forget about this.
Without even a moment's hesitation.
And I think this one might actually be worse than WrestleMania 27 as well, which really
Oh yeah,
sucks.
I would 100% put it that way,
Yeah.
without doubt.
All right, well, on to the final Mania of this list, WrestleMania 30. This one was famous for being bookended by Daniel Bryan and the Yes Movement. In my opinion, Daniel Bryan put on one of the classic MVP performances at a Mania with this, akin to stuff like Bret Hart did. I think WrestleMania 10 or 9
10, I think it was.
when he faced Owen Hart in the opening match and then beat Yokozuna in the main event. I think Daniel Bryan in this beating Triple H to actually earn the right to be in the WWE World Heavyweight Championship match and then beating Batista and Randy Orton is fantastic. I need to mention this saw the streak broken by Brock Lesnar. And at the time, I remember I was getting picked up by my older cousin Vasily. And I said to him just in passing, "Oh, how did The Undertaker do?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, he lost." And I didn't believe him because, Thanasi, you will know this very well. Our cousin Vasily has a tendency to sort of bullshit a bit and to sort of have fun. But he was being dead serious. And when I realized that, I was like the fans in attendance, I genuinely could not articulate my thoughts. I was that gobsmacked by it.
See,
Uh,
I'll give you a slightly different perspective on my memories of this WrestleMania. I had stopped watching wrestling by this point, and I don't even think I was aware of very much. I was vaguely aware of the Yes Movement, but I wasn't super watching wrestling. And I watched this WrestleMania back last year. Well, actually, no, year before. I watched it back in 2022. And what I saw from the main event was the crowd could not care less silent when there was action between Batista and Randy Orton. The crowd was not reacting. As soon as Daniel Bryan entered the fray during this match, that's when the crowd would pick up and get noisy. But then the story of the match would go that the two of them would gang up to push him out of the way so they could focus on each other. And then it had like this back and forth of this very volatile kind of crowd super engaged, crowd not engaged at all, crowd super engaged, not at all. So adding on top of that, the fact that for some stupid reason, Cena buried Bray Wyatt and sent him heading on a career of just really weird booking decisions, really unfortunate booking decisions. I do not think of this WrestleMania very highly, I must say.
See, that's interesting because this isn't one that I remember vividly, but it has historical significance. That closing moment of Daniel Bryan with the championships over his head is fantastic, and I think again, Brock Lesnar versus The Undertaker, I might be alone in this. I don't think that's a terrible match. I think it's just a booking decision that really surprised everyone.
My view in making this decision and in putting my view forward is that, say, as an example, WrestleMania 29, one match card. WrestleMania 27, also potentially one match card. WrestleMania 30, it's a one moment card, if I can put it that way. Like the entire match was not a standout match. It was the moment of Daniel Bryan actually getting his crowning achievement that saves this show at all. So that's what is taking me into considering putting this one into Let's Forget About It. Because as long as we remember the closing moments, the rest of the pay-per-view really is irrelevant.
I think it'd be harsh to put it in the bottom because you're saying it's not a great match. I think Daniel Bryan does a lot with the opener and the closer. I think, uh, can we agree on so much promise?
Can we put it at the bottom of so much promise?
Oh, I think that's so harsh, but all right. Uh, uh, I think you can tell by that you didn't live the yes movement,
I no, it's
given
true
your.
that it's true that I didn't. So I'm offering my opinion as an objective fan who watched this long after the fact and just considered it purely for what it offered.
All right. Well, to recap our list, we have, and we'll work our way backwards.
Let's do it backwards.
So we have WrestleMania 30 in so much promise, and you want to put it at the bottom of that category. I can, okay, fine. We have WrestleMania 29 in Let's Forget About This, the bottom of that category, without a
Yep.
doubt. WrestleMania 28, we have in so much promise. And we'll probably, for now, I think we'll put that next to WrestleMania 30.
Mhm.
WrestleMania 27, Let's Forget About This, is above 29, but still not great. WrestleManias 26 and 25 are both so much promise. Is there one that you prefer to the other?
I think of 25 a bit more fondly, to be quite frank with you.
In that case, we'll put 25 ahead of 26, but I think both go ahead of 28. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. WrestleMania 24, we have in Intestinal Fortitude. I think that's a fair placement. WrestleMania 23 is in so much promise as well. What do we think? Where does that factor? Is that better than 25?
I think so.
All right, well, then I'll just put it there at the top. WrestleMania 22, we put in all time. I still think it's a great Mania. I have no concerns about that whatsoever. And WrestleMania 21, we were arming and ahhing between intestinal fortitude and all time. Thanasi, I'm going to give you the deciding say now. Where do we put it?
Well, seeing as we're going to be putting WrestleMania 22 at the very, very top as an all-time WrestleMania, and we've agreed to have WrestleMania 24 as intestinal fortitude, I still think that I would think of this one as an all-timer because of the innovation, the match of the night performance between Angle and Shawn Michaels, and the two first-time coronations, the historicity of it.
I'm happy to back that. We'll put 22 above it, but we have those two as all timers. And that's our list. Let us know in the comments if you think we got it right or if you think we've made a huge mistake. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Next week, we're going to be doing WrestleManias 11 to 20. And obviously, there are some standout manias to discuss within that period as well.